The Paladin Incident, something that was only mentioned a single time in Volume 7 as Watts' involvement in things happening behind the scene was being revealed. Councilman Slate said that this was where Watts was supposed to have died. We now know, of course, that he faked his death at this time, and likely this was the point when he went to go join Salem in the Dark Continent. It's very likely that he was in contact with Salem before this, because Watts doesn't really seem like the type of person to act without a plan in mind already, so he must have already made those connections and had the plan in place, etc. But the Paladin Incident itself must have been a pretty major event to happen in Atlas for it to be referred to as the Paladin Incident. Just be something that, everyone knows about by calling it by its name. This is obviously significant for Watts' past, as this is where he was supposed to have died, and the death of a major scientist in Atlas would be a major event. But I feel that this is also very important for Ironwood. Of course, losing a scientist in his military would be quite significant, but I think this also ties into how his body actually ended up the way it is, that Watts is partially to blame for that as well. Not to mention that it could tie into other characters that may be revealed later on in Volume 8, because Watts is still alive and kicking with Salem arriving there. More will be revealed about the past of Atlas, hopefully, as, Atlas is going to be falling to the ground. It may as well get its past out in the open now, but still, there's a lot that we can discuss about the Paladin Incident, even though we know not very much about it. We do know that Pietro and Watts and the rest of their science team were charged by Ironwood to take the next step in Atlas defense technology, and for Watts, his project was the Paladin Project. He is the designer of the Paladins. We found out, thanks to his profile on Amity Arena, that he's responsible for a fair amount of technology in Atlas. The Paladins were one of his creations. Of course, the Mantle Security Network was something that he had a large hand in, designing most of it himself, and also in environmental dust control, he had a major hand in as well. Like, I don't know, the biome system in Amity Coliseum. The reason why Watts had such knowledge about that, all the biomes that were in place, knew what to take control of, when and where and how to manipulate it, is because he helped a lot with that technology, just showing that he had a huge advantage in that fight against Ironwood, even though he's not really that combat-oriented. Now, because of his massive involvement in things, he was regarded as a genius scientist. But now, in the current storyline, he's a disgraced Atlesian scientist, and I think the Paladin Project, or the Paladin Incident, is also to blame for that as well. It's obvious that Watts has a very large ego, that he considers himself better than pretty much everyone else around him, and especially when it comes to Pietro. Hence why he called him, "You chose that fat imbecile over me," as he said to Ironwood in his fight. Pietro is someone that he sees as beneath him. Someone who might try to design shoes that make you dance. That type of thing is beneath Watts, something that he would never consider inventing. But yet, when tasked with designing the next step in Atlesian defense technology, Watts took the logical step of going towards the Paladins, removing soldiers from the battlefield, going for more heavy armor and technology. But, as we also see in his Amity profile, that this was more a killing machine. This was what Ironwood and Watts, would have thought to design. But Pietro took a different route. He looked inward. He sacrificed the color of his soul for his designs. He created a soul by creating Penny, something that just was far beyond what Ironwood and Watts were going to be able to think of on their own. Ironwood was able to recognize this. Watts, on the other hand, did not like the idea that Pietro was above him, and thus, pretty much spawned his connection with Salem. The reason he seems to have joined Salem was because of his hatred for Ironwood and for Pietro, that Ironwood just didn't acknowledge his genius, even though all of these things that he created, the Mantle Security Network, the Paladins, the environmental dust controls, are all still used in Atlas today. Watts couldn't get over that one defeat, shall we say. His next step in defense technology is still being utilized, it just wasn't chosen as the top project, which is something that, really conflicted with Watts. So at some point between the time when the Penny Project was chosen over the Paladin Project and the time of the Paladin Incident actually occurring, Salem made contact with Watts. Now, the exact way in which this happened, we don't exactly know. This will probably be revealed later on, but Salem does have connections throughout every single kingdom in Remnant, and it wouldn't surprise me, the way that she's able to communicate through the Seer Grim, though Watts only encountered the Seer Grim in Volume 5 and was very curious about it. He's very much a scientist first and foremost, and, you know, is interested in new designs, how things work, and etc. It's just his ego, you know, prevents him from a lot of different things. One thing I will mention, though, even though he does have a massive ego, he isn't going to take credit for something that he didn't do himself. Again, in Volume 5, when the Seer Grim was revealed and he was talking with Leonardo, he didn't take credit for finding the Spring Maiden. That was thanks to Crow Bronwyn. So Watts, even though he does have an ego, is still humble in some regards. But Salem likely made contact with Watts through Grim of some kind. Also, she probably has some familiarity with technology on top of that, because being alive and in Remnant for, you know, the entire time that humanity had its time to develop, from being literally turned to dust to growing to where it is in Remnant currently, she's had all this time to learn everything she can. She is not dumb, so she definitely would have done something along those lines. Not to mention she also has magic, would probably have other ways of communicating. You know, it wouldn't be too surprising. And the way she found out about Watts would be pretty easy as well. If she had any connection in Mantle or Atlas, all she would have to know is, this scientist is very pissed off with Ironwood, that his project wasn't chosen, and he was very, you know, disgruntled about that. Maybe had been keeping tabs on him, that he was someone who had this massive ego, had a problem with the kingdoms themselves. Hopefully things like that will be revealed later on, because this is pretty much all conjecture right now, considering that we don't really know much about that. So, at that point, after making the connection with Salem, Watts would have devised this plan to make the Paladin Incident actually happen. Maybe this was going to be a demonstration of the Paladins themselves, the first run, if you will, of, you know, their creation. And Watts sabotaged it. He made things happen so it exploded, so that things would happen where it would seem that he would have died, and likely there were other casualties at the same time. I wouldn't be surprised, and honestly kind of expect, that if this was going to be something catastrophic, considering it's the Paladin Incident, this would be probably something on the lines of a chain reaction, explosion that happened in a lab as these Paladins were being revealed. Maybe Watts was inside a Paladin and it exploded, but I kind of don't think that's the case, because that would be kind of hard to fake, considering there's debris and there would have to be a body. Probably he used someone as a patsy or something like that. But if there was a large-scale explosion, you'd think that Watts would try to involve Ironwood with this, that he would be there to witness it, and likely Watts would try to take Ironwood down at that time. As he's leaving Atlas and Mantle, well, in this case, faking his death, he would want to take Ironwood down. We know he has a deep-seated hatred for Ironwood, and this would be the perfect opportunity to try to kill him. And in doing so, he almost succeeded. Hence why Ironwood's body is now half metal. I think that Watts is responsible for the injuries that led to that point. Because let's be real here. The injuries that Ironwood would have had to have sustained to necessitate a body half made of metal, well, anyone would die from that. In our world, if someone lost half their body like that, it would be an immediate death sentence. In the world of RWBY, where there are other things at play, other factors like aura and semblance and things like that, technology far above what we are currently capable of now, it's more reasonable that someone could survive, but still very unlikely. For Ironwood to sustain injuries that serious, well, he would have first had to have his aura broken, and second, have to have lost a good portion of his body. His leg, his arm, and, you know, half of his torso, where his inner organs are and everything like that. If that happened out on the battlefield, or from a ship crash, or something where, you know, aid wasn't immediately able to get to him and save his life, keep him alive until they could operate on him and start, you know, reconstructing his organs out of metal and technology, etc., I still think that he would have died. But if this injury was sustained in the Paladin Incident, where, being a presentation by Dr. Arthur Watts, a prominent scientist in Atlas, there would likely be other scientists, other doctors in attendance who were curious about what Watts was creating. And so, if this injury did happen to Ironwood at that time, there would be plenty of people available who would be able to administer life-saving aid right then and there. And so it seems reasonable that this would be the way that, you know, everything would have happened. Watts' initial goal was, of course, to kill Ironwood and also escape on his own so he could go join Salem, etc. But with everyone rushing to Ironwood's aid, this probably would have given him a good opportunity, or even more opportunity, to escape. Now, this was also likely the time when Watts was deemed a disgraced scientist, because leading up to this point, where Watts had contributed a lot to Mantle's security, the environmental dust controls, and the Paladin project itself being designed by Watts, he was still probably in everyone's good graces. But if he put on a grand display of the Paladin projects, possibly sending them out of control to cause this giant explosion, or at least making it very obvious that he was grandstanding, revealing that he's an egomaniac. People were probably well aware that he had an ego leading up to that point, but still played nice with others, etc. But at this point, kind of snapped, went off the rails, saying that Ironwood never appreciated his genius, things like that, by having Pietro chosen over him, etc. And then went on this grand display. Everything seemed to malfunction, and then Watts ended up dying, or faking his own death, as everyone found out later. Ironwood got involved, whether he was standing next to the explosion, or an idea was proposed on my Discord server that Ironwood actually jumped into the explosion to save Clover. That, being the Paladin project, something that was going to be used by the military, it would make sense that maybe some members of the military, high-ranking ones, would also be there to witness this at the same time, Clover being one of them. We know that Clover has an undying loyalty to Ironwood, that he would take Ironwood's orders and serve them no matter the cost. Hence why, he went after arresting Crow rather than, trying to re-arrest Tyrion and that whole debacle. I plan on going over that in a separate video, but if Ironwood had jumped into that explosion to save one of his soldiers, being Clover, that would make sense why Clover is so loyal to Ironwood, that he trusts Ironwood with his life, etc. So that's my overall thinking on how the Paladin project, or the events leading up to the Paladin project, may have played out. We know that the Paladin project did take place before the start of the RWBY series, as the Paladins themselves were only ready to be revealed in Volume 2. Ironwood was making that grand announcement that the next step in technology from the Atlesian Knights were to the Atlesian Paladin, and after that, after the Vital Festival tournament, then Ironwood was planning to reveal the Penny Project. That Penny was the final step in the defense of Atlas. That with Penny, someone who was able to do so many great things, would be well received. I don't exactly know how well that was going to go, whether the Vital Festival tournament would have been considered rigged at that point by having, technically a super weapon just placed into the tournament, designed as a young girl, etc. There's, other problems associated with that. But still, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below on what your thoughts are around the Paladin incident. As I said, we don't know much about it, and a lot of this that I've said so far is just my own thinking on how events happened leading up to the Paladin project. There's still a lot of holes that need to be filled in. Hopefully in Volume 8 we'll get more information on this from, Watts, from Ironwood, from other people in Atlas. I'd be curious to know as well if Watts, or at least the team that Watts was working with on the Paladin project, is still active in Atlas, or if they were all taken out during this, Paladin incident as well. Because Watts certainly wasn't designing the Paladins himself. He had to have had help, technicians, etc. along with him. Now he is skilled, but still, designing a major scale form of technology like a Paladin would take a little bit of work and effort alongside that. This also explains why Watts was able to hack into the Paladin systems, gain access to the Atlesian Knights. Maybe he even had a hand in designing them as well. Again, a lot we need to find out in Atlas moving forward. I look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, are starting to think more about the past of Atlas, things that we might find out in Volume 8. Make sure to subscribe if you did enjoy. Join the Guild of the Eternal Flame. Join our Discord server as well. Tweet me at Phoenix Knight 7, and I'll see you guys in the next video.